In April 2025, the Trump administration's tariffs on Chinese goods climbed past 145%. American manufacturing was finally about to win. That was the message from the White House podium. That was the message on cable news. 6 months later, on October 9th, Beijing answered with a single regulation that froze auto plants in Germany, defense contractors in Texas, and the entire global magnet supply chain. The pressure campaign reversed direction in 72 hours. Now Donald Trump is flying back to Beijing, the first sitting American president to set foot in China since November 2017. Air Force One lands at Beijing Capital International Airport on May 14, 2026. The official agenda is tariffs, rare earth minerals, advanced chip exports, and the Iran war. The White House is calling it a pressure campaign. Beijing is calling it a victory lap. Both sides cannot be right. And what happens inside the Great Hall of the People over the next 48 hours will tell us which one is closer to the truth. To understand what Trump is walking into, you have to understand how this fight evolved. In April 2025, the new Trump administration imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods that, at their peak, pushed effective rates past 145%. Beijing retaliated with two moves of its own. First, it slapped reciprocal duties on American exports. Second, and far more dangerous, it began tightening export controls on rare earth elements, the obscure but essential minerals that sit inside every electric motor, every guided missile, every advanced semiconductor, and every fighter jet the Pentagon flies. By October 2025, Beijing expanded those controls dramatically. Under new rules issued by China's Ministry of Commerce on October 9th, exporters had to obtain specific permits for any product containing even 0.1% Chinese-sourced rare earths. The rules applied not only to Chinese exports, but to foreign manufactured goods anywhere in the world. Production lines in Stuttgart slowed, defense contractors in Fort Worth scrambled. And in the Oval Office, the White House reached for a phone. Within weeks, Trump and Xi met in Busan, South Korea on the sidelines of the APEC summit. The result was a tariff truce. Trump cut fentanyl-related duties on Chinese goods. Beijing resumed soybean imports and suspended, though did not remove, its rare earth restrictions. The peak rates came down. Markets stabilized. Both leaders publicly called the truce a win. But here's the part the headlines glossed over. China's rare earth suspension was not a concession. It was a pause. Beijing's expanded export controls remain on the books, ready to be reactivated. The suspension expires on November 10, 2026. That is 6 months from the Beijing summit. 6 months. Every analyst tracking the rare earth file understands the math. Whatever Trump signs in Beijing, Xi holds the timer. China's leverage in critical minerals is not theoretical. Beijing controls roughly 70% of global rare earth mining production. It controls 85 to 90% of global processing capacity. And it produces approximately 90% of the world's high-performance permanent magnets. According to the U.S. Department of Defense's 2022 Industrial Capabilities Report, a single F-35 Joint Strike Fighter contains 920 pounds of rare earth materials. Every Tomahawk missile, every Virginia-class submarine, every Aegis radar system relies on inputs that Beijing can choke off with a stroke of a pen. This is the asymmetry Trump's negotiating team is walking into. The United States can apply tariffs. The United States can apply sanctions. The United States can apply export controls on advanced semiconductors. But the United States cannot, in any meaningful time frame, replicate 60 years of Chinese investment in rare earth processing infrastructure. American refined rare earth production grew over 400% year-on-year in 2024, according to TD Economics. That number sounds impressive until you understand the starting point was almost nothing. Building real ex-China midstream capacity is a multi-decade industrial project, not a presidential signing ceremony. That is exactly why Beijing is so confident heading into this summit. According to sources cited by the South China Morning Post this week, Chinese officials have grown bolder since playing their rare earth card in October. They are less worried about tariffs. They believe Beijing has the ability to retaliate strongly and withstand pressure if Washington escalates. The Council on Foreign Relations went further in its May 10th assessment, warning that the center of gravity in the U.S.-China economic contest has shifted decisively away from tariffs and toward critical minerals. Trump's tariff weapon was further dulled earlier this year when the Supreme Court invalidated his use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act as the legal basis for sweeping country-specific tariffs. The ruling did not touch Section 301 tariffs, which remain in force, but it gutted the ability to deploy emergency tariff authority on a presidential timetable. The administration is now rebuilding its trade arsenal through Section 301 investigations, a slower process that takes months and requires formal findings. Beijing has been watching this carefully. They know the timer is now running on Washington as well. Now we get to the chip dimension, where the contradiction inside Trump's China strategy becomes hardest to ignore. On December 8, 2025, Trump announced from Truth Social that the United States would allow Nvidia to export its H200 artificial intelligence chips to approved customers in China. The deal included a 25% tariff on those chip sales, with the proceeds flowing to the U.S. Treasury. Trump framed it as American jobs and American manufacturing. Critics inside his own coalition framed it differently. The H200 is not a commodity processor. It is one of the most advanced AI accelerators on Earth, second only to Nvidia's next-generation Blackwell chip. Allowing it into Chinese data centers, even with end-use restrictions, hands Beijing computational capacity that directly underwrites its military artificial intelligence program, its surveillance state, and the People's Liberation Army's autonomous weapons development. The Council on Foreign Relations called the decision paradoxical. They noted that the Trump administration was using tariffs to reshore American manufacturing while simultaneously lifting export controls on the very chips that power, in Jensen Huang's own words, the factories of the future. Going into Beijing, Trump is expected to discuss Nvidia's Blackwell processor, the chip he himself called the super-duper chip during his pre-APEC press availability. Beijing wants it. Nvidia wants to sell it. The 25% revenue share template is already in place, and the same delegation accompanying Trump to Beijing reportedly includes Jensen Huang himself, alongside Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg and Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser. Boeing is hoping to seal its first large Chinese aircraft order in nearly a decade. Citi has been operating in China for 124 years. The corporate incentives traveling in Air Force One are not aligned with maximum pressure on Beijing. They are aligned with access. Consider what Boeing alone represents. The Chicago-based aircraft maker has not closed a major Chinese order in nearly a decade. China's commercial aviation fleet is one of the largest in the world, and every aircraft Beijing buys from a non-American manufacturer is a long-term revenue stream lost to Airbus. Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg. Flying to Beijing in the president's delegation is not a coincidence. It is the entire negotiation in microcosm. American corporate executives need the Chinese market to keep their stock prices intact. Their pension funds, their bondholders, their shareholders all want stability. Stability is what Beijing is selling, and the price Beijing is asking is restraint on tariffs, on chip controls, and on Taiwan language. That is not the position of a country being pressured. That is the position of a country dictating terms. The contradictions get sharper when you zoom out. Earlier this year, Vice President J.D. Vance announced a proposed critical mineral trading bloc, with the United States coordinating policy tools with Australia, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand to counter Chinese dominance. Trump signed agreements at the October 2025 ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur that committed Malaysia not to ban or quota critical mineral exports to the United States. Cambodia agreed to open its market. Thailand signed a memorandum of understanding. Australia opened talks on a $1.2 billion critical minerals strategic reserve. These deals are real. The strategy is coherent on paper. The problem is the clock. Pakistan signed a memorandum on September 8, 2025, with U.S. strategic metals to produce critical minerals using Chinese-supplied extraction equipment. Beijing responded by expanding its rare earth export controls within days. The pattern is clear. Every time Washington moves to diversify supply, Beijing tightens the screws on the materials and the technology that diversification depends on. The mining is one thing. The processing equipment, the separation technology, the magnet manufacturing know-how, those remain in Chinese hands, and Beijing is making sure they stay there. If you are following along so far and finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. The War Briefs report covers this story every week with the names, the numbers, and the documented sourcing the legacy press leaves out. Now let us talk about the Iran wildcard, the midterm calculation, and what Beijing is really negotiating for. The Beijing summit was originally supposed to happen in late March 2026. It was delayed because of the Iran war. In late February 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces struck Iranian nuclear facilities. Tehran retaliated by attempting to close the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point through which roughly 20% of global seaborne oil passes. Oil prices spiked, stock markets sold off, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on Fox News on May 4th and publicly asked Beijing to help reopen the strait. This is one of the quieter humiliations in recent American statecraft. The world's largest economy, with 11 aircraft carrier strike groups and a defense budget approaching $1 trillion, asking Beijing for help reopening an oil choke point. China responded by hosting Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Beijing this week, the first such visit since the war began. Oil prices fell on the news. Markets read it as Beijing positioning itself as the responsible great power on Iran, while Washington fights and Bessent pleads. Trump's Treasury Secretary has already confirmed Iran will be a major topic in the Beijing meetings. That is leverage flowing in only one direction. China cannot solve the Iran war, but it can claim credit for cooling it. And every concession China extracts from Trump on tariffs, rare earths, or chips in exchange for Iranian de-escalation is a concession the president's pre-summit talking points said he would not make. Then there is the midterm calculation. Brookings Institution fellow Jude Sin told reporters this week that Beijing is, in his words, working backward from our midterm elections. The theory is straightforward. The closer the calendar gets to November 2026, the more domestic political pressure mounts on Trump and the Republican Congress. The more pressure mounts, the more Beijing's leverage grows. Why offer a deal in May when you can offer a smaller deal in October, after another 6 months of slow, rare earth squeeze, and another 2 months of Iran-driven oil volatility? The polling makes that calculation rational. Recent surveys show a majority of American voters are unhappy with the administration's economic policies. The Alliance of Democracies Democracy Perception Index, released May 8th, places China's net global perception at plus 7%. The international perception of the United States by the same measure has fallen to negative 16%. That is a 38-point swing against Washington in 2 years. Xi sees those numbers. So does every Chinese trade negotiator preparing the Beijing briefing books. And there is Taiwan, the issue Trump did not want to discuss, but which Beijing has already announced will dominate. Chinese state media spent the week ahead of the summit reiterating the One China principle. According to analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Taipei is privately worried Trump will make rhetorical concessions on cross-strait language. Specifically, Taipei is watching for any shift from the phrase, does not support Taiwan independence, to the harder phrase, opposes Taiwan independence. The first is American policy since 1972. The second is a unification green light. Trump indicated he discussed arms sales to Taiwan with Xi in a February phone call. Taipei does not know how that conversation ended. Neither does Congress. What does Trump have to offer in exchange for all this? On paper, the answer is access. Soybean purchases, Boeing aircraft orders, energy procurement contracts, a reduction in fentanyl-related tariffs, possibly a path forward on the Blackwell chip with another revenue-sharing structure. CSIS analysis published this week argued that the summit will represent, in their words, a relatively modest step toward greater stability and predictability. That is diplomatic language for, nobody expects a major win. The Council on Foreign Relations was more direct. In their May 10th analysis, they wrote that the United States enters the summit facing an uncomfortable reality. Its rapid expenditure of advanced weapon systems in the Middle East and Ukraine has deepened American vulnerabilities in supply chains tied to rare earth elements and permanent magnets, the very inputs Beijing dominates. Said plainly, Washington is sending its president to negotiate with the country that supplies the magnets in the missiles the Pentagon is burning through. This is the picture as Air Force One taxis toward Beijing, a summit framed as American pressure but conducted on Chinese terms. A tariff weapon dulled by a Supreme Court ruling that struck down Emergency Powers Tariff Authority and forced the administration to rebuild its trade arsenal through the slower Section 301 investigation framework. A rare earth weapon Beijing has paused, but not surrendered. A chip policy that contradicts itself. A delegation of CEOs whose corporate priorities do not align with confrontation. A Treasury Secretary publicly asking Beijing for help with Iran, and a November 10th deadline ticking in the background like a metronome. The optics will look fine. There will be a banquet at the Great Hall of the People. There will be smiling photographs at the Forbidden City. Trump will post on Truth Social that the meetings were very, very productive. Xi will tell Chinese state media that the two countries are entering a new chapter of stable, mutually respectful relations. Markets will rally on the headlines. But underneath the staged optics, the structural question remains. After 6 years of building the world's most concentrated chokehold on rare earth processing, after 6 years of accumulating commodity buffers and strategic crude reserves approaching 1.4 billion barrels, after 6 years of expanding legal authority to target foreign companies, after 6 years of watching America burn through its own munition stocks in 2 simultaneous wars, does Xi Jinping actually need to give Donald Trump anything? That is the question the cameras will not ask. That is the question the joint statement will not answer. And that is the question every American who watches the Beijing summit should keep in mind when the smiling photographs hit their feeds on May 15th. The pressure campaign is real. The pressure direction is the part Washington gets wrong. This was the War Brief's report. If this breakdown helped you understand what is actually at stake in Beijing this week, hit subscribe. We cover the geopolitical files, legacy media berries every week. The next briefing drops in 48 hours.